Hello, Neil, and welcome to Southside Stories. It's great to see you.
Hi Matt, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to having a chat.
Yeah, me too, because you're really in a very interesting part of the attractions of London. We're going to get into that in a second. But Neil, we always start the same way, which is tell me a little bit about you, where you're based, your job title, and your company, and maybe just give us a little. We're going to go into the company in a lot more detail, but just the little snapshot of you and the company would be great to get us
Yeah,
going.
definitely. So I'm managing director of Little Lion Entertainment. We've got our HQ based in right in the heart of Soho, with our experiences, one in London, which is the Crystal Maze, and then our Crystal Maze and Arcade Arena up in Manchester, where we have another head office. My kind of journey started 3 years ago at this company, but in a kind of, I would say, unexpected turn. I actually studied chemistry at university, and if I'll tell you, there's one thing that makes you want to work in a people industry, it's spending all of your life in the lab.
Yeah.
Uh, so very much enjoyed working rather than studying, and then rose up through the ranks, I guess, as many people do in this industry, and moved down to London, and here I am. So, not necessarily what I set off to do when I left the Highlands of Scotland, but everyone has their own unique way of getting here, I suppose.
And I'm curious, has the chemistry come in useful at all at any stage?
Embarrassingly, I probably remember very little chemistry, although the mathematics side is,
Yeah,
in business is absolutely transferable, and that's probably the
yeah,
biggest benefit that I've had from it. Yeah.
yeah. I was going to say you're probably really good with numbers and analysis. Yeah. And then pre Little Lion. So have you been? How long have you been at Little Lion?
So this is my third year this month.
Okay.
Prior to that, I was with Merlin Entertainment. I started Edinburgh Dungeon when I was up north, and then moved to the London Eye for 7 or 8 years before moving to Merlin Tussauds. So have very much always been
Yeah.
in this kind of industry. If you discount my days as a very below average fish and chip shop worker.
And is this one of those things where the first gig was sort of a student job and you just liked the industry and it went from there?
It's exactly that. My first real job that I was supposed to get in at university in my second year was, I actually ended up playing ice hockey semi-professionally, and that took up all my time. And then I basically got a job where I could earn some money for beer at the
Mm,
weekend, and that just
mm.
became the next thing. When you're looking forward to work more than studying, and that's really when I got into it. I want to work with people, and that's what our business is, right? It's our team and it's our guests, and that's just kind of stayed with me for this whole time.
That's great. All right, so we're going to get into that in a second. I think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, my first job was actually as a telemarketer down in Bristol, and that it was literally. I remember the interview actually, and I said somewhat arrogantly to the HR person, I'm only going to be here for a couple of months." And 6 years later, I'd moved up to London by that point, and yeah, I mean, I literally started doing telemarketing and then became sort of campaign director. And but it's interesting, isn't it? These first steps and these in life and where eventually they take you.
They're so important, and to be honest, it's one of the things I'm most passionate about is having those roles for people to go into, because people,
Yeah,
not everyone starts out looking to join this industry. They do it as either a stopgap or a first job, and
yeah,
I know we'll potentially come on to it later on, but that's a real risk if those aren't there. That's a lot of
yeah.
how people get resilience and experience and skills.
It is.
That's essential for an economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we are going to definitely talk about that in a second. Let's go back to Little Lion though. Let's just explain a little bit more now about the sort of proposition because it sounds fascinating. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to just understanding a little bit more about what the experience is like, what the business model is, and what it's like as a customer.
Yeah, so we Little Lion itself will be 10 years old this year, and its first venue was the Crystal Maze Live experience in Angel, And that was just an incredible success. And it was the first real insight as to this immersive experience and real immersive experience. The word immersive is used on everything from experiences to laundry detergent these days. But this was a real pioneering business. And then it expanded into Manchester in 2017 and had a franchise in Saudi Arabia in 2021. And in the April of last year, we acquired another business called the Insync. And that's where our business has really become one of two sides. So we have our immersive side, and this is where the Crystal Maze sits, and continues to go from strength to strength. And then we have the other side of our business, which is our arcade arena. And our first game of that was Chaos Cards, which was playing in Manchester, still is playing for another week or so, and is in Dubai currently. And that will then be replaced with Pac-Man, the live experience, which launches 21st of March, and will also launch in other territories. And the purpose of the arcade arenas, and we talk a lot about it in our office, is think of it like a PlayStation 5. And the arcade arena is the games console, and the games that go into it are very much like when you buy a new game for your PlayStation. And what that allows is, and we know this from consumers now, consumers seek new content all the time. They want the newest trend. This allows us to basically have the existing infrastructure and put in a new game. And from both a consumer and a business perspective, it's quite revolutionary, actually, because for a relatively low capex cost, you can create this whole new world with a building that's already there without having to take a gamble, take a risk on spending a load of capex on something that might not work, and then ripping it all out and putting something else in. So the exciting thing for us is we have two sides, and we're kind of equally as passionate about both. So one is very analog, retro, human being interaction, which is the Crystal Maze side, the immersive side. And the other side is very digitally driven, new technology, innovative way of bringing video games and games to life for the consumer.
For those that don't know, you and I are probably a similar vintage, but we certainly remember the Crystal Maze. Could you just describe it for those that don't know what the Crystal Maze is, and also how close your experience is to the original?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, you've kind of put your finger on the biggest challenge of not the biggest challenge, challenge and opportunity of the Crystal Maze now, because Crystal Maze was an absolute cult success in the 90s. And it's famous for Richard O'Brien, the wacky maze master, larger than life character, who would take a group of 8 people around 4 zones, and they would play games to earn crystals, and depending on how many crystals they earned, that got them time in the crystal dome. The music would come up, the flashing lights would come up, and then they tried to grab sort of tickets out of the air. And our experience replicates it exactly as it was. So it's groups of 8 taking through, 25,000 square foot. These are not small sites of really weird and wacky interactive games inspired by the original show. So, you could be doing anything from firing a bow and arrow at a knight, or there's one where you're sat on a horse trying to hit a target, to a futuristic game where you're trying to create an earthquake out of the sand. And this is that true feeling of being a child again, getting to have fun. And that is, whoever you put in the maze, their energy levels can be whatever it is at the beginning, they always come out on a 10.
When I heard about this, because we had a pre-chat to this, I immediately I got to go to this. And there might be similar people listening right now. Where do I find it? How much does it cost? Can I go with just 2 people, or do I need the group of 8?
Yeah, so we've got one in Shaftesbury Avenue, right next to Piccadilly Station in London. And we have one in Manchester in the old Granada Studios, just off Lower Byron Street.
Oh, yeah.
And you can go, we have one person called Dan, who is our absolute super fan. He comes by himself all the time, and he's been 93 times. So he comes, to the point that all of our team know him. He wants to play
Yeah.
every game. He wants to be the first person to test everything. So, he comes by himself and he'll join others to make up a group up to 8. Or we get groups of, particularly corporates, 70, 80, 100 people. And we can facilitate both. And depending on the consumer, depending on what people want, we have packages for everyone. So we've done a huge shift, particularly recently, in targeting the family market, because it's a huge opportunity. We used to be very couples, groups of friends, corporate focused. And potentially my background's always been family attractions like Madame Tussauds and London Eye, but marketing to that demographic is very different. They're much more price sensitive than sort of groups of friends and particularly corporates. So, you have to, we go out of our way to try and tailor different packages at different times of the year. So quite often during the school holidays, Easter coming up, we'll do 50% off for families. And then our packages go up to everything from the sort of super premium to which we offer sort of corporate groups where, depending on what package they pick, it could be £175 for 2 meals, room hire, gameplay. And, we kind of try and tailor it to who's coming, because the sort of one size fits all model, it just doesn't work in this consumer
Right.
environment anymore.
Yeah. Got it. And that's I can picture it. The Pac-Man, the arcade side, just paint the scene for me. So when I walk into that, is it it's a room? Is it just paint that? What does it feel like on the
Yeah,
arcade side?
absolutely. So it is effectively a 12,000 square foot box, and the entire world is projected around everyone. So the players will wear pack vests, which effectively allow that when they're on the maze, which is projected on the floor, we can track them picking up pellets, picking up pack pellets, being chased by the ghosts. And on the walls, it's got the leader. So every individual player has an individual score. And it also has on one of the other walls, it projects where each of the players are within the maze. So, if you, similar to how we deliberately kept the Crystal Maze to mirror the game, we've kept Pac-Man to, as much as possible, replicate the game. So if someone says, what do I do when I go to see Pac-Man the live experience? You say, you become Pac-Man. And that's the easiest way to explain it. And from our side, it's the easiest way to create it. Because as you would expect, we worked with Bandai Namco. It's the 45th anniversary of Pac-Man this year. It's a world-renowned IP. So we want to make sure that we create something that both the people who come know what they're going to get, and when we create IP partnerships, we want to make sure that our partners are loving what we're doing as well. We don't just want to completely rip out the rule book.
Great. It sounds awesome. Tell me a little bit about, you talked a bit, somewhat about this already, but in terms of sort of customers, we maybe can switch to sort of Pac-Man. What's your sort of target there? And also how do you reach out and build awareness of, because they sound amazing experiences. And I guess sometimes it's it's how do you get over this? Okay, Pac-Man I've heard of, but I'm not sure what this experience is going to be like. How do you communicate the proposition and give people kind of a feeling of what it's going to be like?
Yeah, and to be honest, you've touched on what is the biggest challenge with propositioning, particularly since COVID. So my experience pre-COVID was people had an amount of money that they were willing to spend on stuff they didn't know. So, they would try the new thing in town. They didn't necessarily know what it was, but they thought, well, this is new. I'm going to give this a go. And very much what has changed now is, and this kind of comes to the sort of the rhetoric that is often in the press and in the media around cost of living being, mentioned most months, is people will still spend money, but they want to spend money on things that they know what it is. And what that means is you have to show people what it is. So when they buy it, they want to see it on their phone and go, I want to do that. And what all the research I've seen is saying, you need to be able to explain it in about 3 seconds. I think it works out, I think about 3.08 or whatever the data says. But you have to be able to get your message across to someone when they're scrolling on TikTok, scrolling on Instagram. They can just see 3 seconds of a video and they know exactly what they're going to do. So our previous game was Chaos Cards. It's relatively easy to show within 3 seconds. People will
Mm.
see someone in a car firing a weapon at another car, and back. They know what they're getting. The Crystal Maze, that's a slightly different one, because for millennials and people who are coming with younger kids, the theme music and picture of the Crystal Dome, people know what they're getting. Gen Z is the anomaly in this, because they probably won't be coming with their parents, or maybe they will, but chances are they won't be. And they probably didn't watch the Crystal Maze. So the trick there is, instead of it being only brand-led marketing, you need to show them what they're going to do. So they're going to come and do the challenges. And then the fact that it's a Crystal Maze is this amazing retro thing that adds to the experience. So Pac-Man sits in the Chaos Cards bucket, where it's showing people what they're going to be doing when they're on Instagram, and then sort of layering that up with the proposition afterwards. But you need to grab their attention so soon. If you have to explain the proposition in 2-3 sentences, you've lost it.
So very visual channels, I guess, yeah, like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, like, are those key to your marketing strategy?
Absolutely key, and
Yeah.
it goes without saying, and it's never an exact science, and it's not my favorite way of marketing, but there's no denying. But it's
Mm.
influencers. It's
Hmm.
getting people in and
Hmm.
getting them to play it, and people seeing them play it is just exponentially important. Because people trust buying stuff from people they trust, and it sounds very simplistic in that respect, but I remember very clearly when we were doing our Chaos Cards launch, for example, and we'd had paid media on for 6 months before, relatively low level, but a bit of interest. And you always get that panic up to launch, and you're seeing the sort of weekly sales are relatively modest, and then all of a sudden we do press and influencer now, and it was 40, 50 times 1 week to the other, by just having people talking about it and engaging with the product and showing them enjoy it. And that is just that's kind of the world we live in.
Very interesting. Tell me about the influencer, I mean, piece. How do you determine and decide which influencer? And then how do you strike the commercial sort of relationship with the influencer?
Yeah, I guess, and if anyone could tell me the exact science, I would love to hear it. A lot of it is based on um, an understanding of their audience. So somebody, for example, could have 125,000 followers on Instagram. But you can kind of go into a couple of their posts and see, what kind of
Mm.
engagement are they getting? Are people engaging with their posts, or are they just following? Or you kind of get that micro Instagram, particularly those who are more local. So your local sort of reviewers, your local
Mm.
experts, maybe around the 15 to 25 to 30,000. But their engagement rates could be incredible. Getting serious conversations going, they're engaging back with their followers. So it's always interesting, I find, when people come to you wanting to collaborate, saying, I want to come and I'm going to post X, Y, and Z. Most people will lead with what their followers are. And in this world, people can buy followers, or they can buy accounts, and they can flip them. But what I find the most interesting is understanding their engagement rate. Or we quite often will ask them, and if they don't know their engagement rate, that's maybe a red flag for us. But so sometimes you have to accept some people will come and it won't do anything. But you have to wait. Well, what have you lost as well?
Do you, because in my day, of course, which was some time ago in terms of doing marketing, we would go to a media agency and the media buy would be, audited and circulation figures and opportunities to see. It was very
Yeah.
there's a lot of data available basically. But with influencers, are you effectively taking it, or you got a bit on trust because you can't really you can get a gauge from looking at their feed, but that's that's the extent really, is it, of how you gauge where you're going to put your money down?
Yeah, and I think what I would say is we typically don't pay for
Okay,
influencers.
okay, right, yeah.
there's going to be obviously the odd one or two that we might consider.
Okay. Mhm.
Um, and I've kind of got two views on it. One is because there's an sort of a authenticity issue sometimes that comes with influencers,
Mm.
particularly people who only do posts that are ads. And again, this comes back to the engagement piece. There's accounts, for example, that I follow, and I don't engage with any of their content because I just know everything's ads. Um, and that's a bit of a risk. And that's why I find it sometimes more interesting when they come to us. Or in the past, we've also worked with influencer agencies to remove that when you're looking more at volume, I suppose, than individuals. Um, but yeah, some if you were to pay a big influencer, for example, then you could dive right into the demographics. Look at what your sort of your Google is telling you, and then make a call. But it's not going to be an exact science unless you do something trackable, like give an influencer a code and use them like an affiliate. But then
Yeah.
it gets maybe a little bit more complicated. And then again, it doesn't look as authentic because it's a partnership. And then do you really achieve the whole people
Yeah.
trust,
Yeah.
buying things from the people they trust?
Yeah. Okay. Let's switch then a little bit broader to the sort of entertainment category, if you like,
Right.
real life kind of entertainment. I'm curious, you touched on it a little bit, but what other, who would you consider as your competition? Of course, you could go very broad, say, anything that competes for an entertainment pound would include cinema, but who do you consider your competition?
Yeah, and it's a tough one for us to answer. I think we've got a couple of buckets. So,
Mm.
in if I was to look at the Crystal Maze, for example, in London, and I look at the sort of broad spectrum of competitors, an obvious one would be something like Phantom Peak. Does something very similar. It's an immersive world where people go in and storylines, and it's incredibly well crafted, by the way. And that's what, people who are looking for that specific immersive, very specific type of entertainment. I would say that's a direct competitor. A big part of our offering, or particularly our sales, come through corporates. It's about 23 to 25% of our business is corporates. And that is where I maybe look at companies like Fair Game in Canary Wharf, where it is like an after work thing where people want a bit of food and activity and, a bit of a team, I guess, a team bonding as such. And then on the family side, I think back to my old sort of stomping grounds, but companies like the London Dungeon, for example, on the South Bank. So families looking for something to do, about an hour and a half. It's not their full day activity. They want to do something really different and fun. And I would say our concept is somewhat similar to that. It's just that it's very different type of branding. So I think we kind of look at different competitors in different times of the year, depending on who's around and what type of demographic we've got coming. But it's not, again, I don't think it's as easy as it used to be, because there are so many different types of
Yeah.
bringing out. There's lots of different buckets.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose London is sort of somewhat unique in the UK, isn't it? Because we've got things like the London Eye. I went to the Tower of London experience. It's like
Uh-huh.
I can't remember what it's called now. It's the same people that do War of the Worlds. It's like
Yes,
a Guy Fawkes kind of
the gunpowder
experience.
plot.
Gunpowder Plot.
Yeah.
Yeah. How healthy would you say? And you talked about post-COVID, people are a bit more perhaps wallet conscious, especially families. How healthy is that category as a whole right now?
The category itself is incredibly healthy
Mm.
because I'm sure you can't go more 2 or 3 days than Blue Loop saying, X experience is opening. So there is definitely huge appetite from a consumer perspective to do stuff. People will always want to do stuff in person. I think where the sort of health of the industry is maybe more challenged is on one is related to IP. Like there is sometimes I feel a perception that just because someone has an IP, it'll do well. And what can always be a challenge in any business, but particularly something which is more, I would say, it's low volume type business. It's not, 100 people every 15 minutes. It's about really intimate experiences, really well honed craft. Is you've really got to focus on profitability, and that balance between experience quality and profitability is so important, because if you don't have, if you cut one too much, the business doesn't work. And has been sad, and is the number of experiences that have closed over the sort of last 2 to 3 years. Um, and in some cases, I've not been overly surprised they've closed. Just by doing sort of back of the fag packet maths, you know how many people are going through the building, you know what price they're selling at, you can loosely understand how much they're probably paying in rent. And if those numbers don't all come together, it's really tough. I think that's why London in particular is tough, because anything to do with property is just exponentially more expensive.
Well, that's a great segue into the sort of next set of questions, which is which is thinking about the running a business, which is requires people, and it requires property, and it requires good locations, right, to get to. Um, Neil, how many people do you employ right now?
So we've got over 200
Uh-huh.
on the book, 200 employees, as I say, split between here and Manchester, and it's probably the thing that keeps me up at night the most.
Mm,
Because again, I go back to an earlier comment of I've been very fortunate in my career that I've always really enjoyed my job, and I've always been well looked after. And I actually give credit to all the companies I've always worked for, because I feel like I've always been well looked after. But the series of announcements that were made in the budget, combined with, and it's a frustrating rhetoric when you're in the sort of line of work that you can't go 2 or 3 days, sorry, without the media talking about cost of living, or governments making tough decisions, or the black hole, credit crunch, and none of this is good sentiment, because people then just worry, and people will never stop doing things, but the first thing that people will cut are leisure and experiences, and they'll rein this stuff in. So you almost get this double squeeze where you can't and shouldn't always look at price increases, because that's psychologically it's detrimental to the cost of living issue. But then you get the squeeze from national insurance hikes, from no landlord puts their rent down, and
yeah.
rates renewals, and utilities going up. So your cost pressures are getting more. Your revenue opportunity is a challenge. So you've only got a few places you can go to retain the profitability, to then protect the jobs. And it's been, I always have said it's the most stressful thing to do when you're talking about human beings and work. And you want to protect the experience, because then otherwise people won't come. And I think that the decisions that have been made in October, and potentially others are going to come down the line, I think for the experience economy particularly, I don't think there is an understanding at a government or council level of what it is. They don't know how to treat it, because they understand tourism and they understand pubs and restaurants and bars, but they don't understand the experience economy.
Mm.
And there's a real risk that the broad brush approach that has been taken, I was looking at some of the numbers just for this. National insurance contribution increase will raise 22 billion, and that will pay for the NHS uplift. So it's almost like someone's done very basic abacus type maths, and it's been, well, it doesn't matter what happens, we have to fix it, so let's just do this. And that's going to be a real problem for markets that are emerging.
How big an impact is the NI increase on you?
It's pretty significant.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit smug in some respects, because we've been taking action probably over the last 18 months to really look at productivity and efficiency. I've got quite a personal personal view around sort of, I'm not a huge fan of pet projects, and people should be out. I always say to my team, it's all about high fives and ice creams, right? If you've not got enough to do, go and high five those coming in the venue. Go and say hi to the kids. Celebrate with the birthday person, because those people are paying our wages. So you've never got nothing to do if you're not speaking to our guests. But particularly in our in Crystal May sites, we looked a lot at, how do we make it a bit more streamlined so that we're not so reliant on labor. Because the easiest thing could be we'll put a person there, but we have no control over that cost.
Yeah.
I would always rather have less people and pay them more. Is my kind of mentality.
You mentioned the business rates, and this has sort of been hovering in the wings, if you like, for a while. Actually, I think everybody realizes that some reform is due there. What's your take of where things are with that right now?
It's really timely actually. I've been working with our local base, the HOLDA. It's the Heart of London Business Alliance, because the proposal currently on the government's website, as far as I understand it, is their proposal is to for businesses with rateable values below 500,000, they want to lower the business rates impact, and then subsequently that be paid by businesses with a rateable value above 500,000. And this kind of comes back to my point about a lack of understanding of the, for one, that's completely arbitrary number that they've chosen. That number is going to hugely disproportionately impact London, because London naturally just has high rateable values because of the cost of property. And I look at some of my venues. We have high rateable values because we need big venues. In London, we have 26,000 square foot. It's Crystal Maze in Shaftesbury Avenue. Logic dictates that's an expensive building, but we don't do volume. I've worked at volume attractions where they can do more in an hour than we'll do in a day. And, you could argue and say we should put more volume through, but then it ruins the experience. That's not what we're there for. So I'm pushing very hard with Holber to rally the government on this, because again, the broad brush approach might look good on a spreadsheet, but there's a real risk, particularly the West End, which is cultural heartbeat of the UK, becomes just a sea of Pret-a-Manger's and Zara's, because they can afford to, a knock on rates, because they'll make up for it on online sales. But my argument is always, we're the businesses that put our risk into the locations to bring people into central London who spend with us and then go for something to eat and then go for a drink and then maybe buy something. Whereas the likes of Amazon will make all their money online and they'll put their warehouses in a field in the middle of nowhere. So they might get away with this rates reduction, even though they're not taking any risk on the central location like we are. And I don't think the government get it. Because there's no West End in Leeds or Liverpool or Southend. There's only one. So it can be very easy for it to fall through the cracks. But once the West End is gone, it doesn't just come back.
Yeah, yeah. And you work with in other international centres like Dubai, and yeah, they're very different places, aren't they? But if you could have a magic wand and take one or two things from your experience of working there, and put it into London, what would those things be?
Yeah, it is it's a completely different world. We were
Yeah.
actually out there with our partner about four weeks ago, and with everything that's going on in the world, fascinating speaking to people who work there. I guess the two things I take away, because I always maintain with certain areas of the world, you can look at it with rose-tinted glasses, but there's so many things that we've got better than they do it there. It can be very easy to forget that.
Yeah.
I think the two things which I wish that we could have in the UK that they have, one is this, I guess, encouragement and support for entrepreneurialism. They're just a city of entrepreneurs who do stuff, and it's very much celebrated. And again, tax systems are made up completely differently, and how people get their money is very different. But that city has grown incredibly quickly through an entrepreneurial spirit. And the other side is this ability to get things done. I always find in the UK, my biggest frustration is, if you want to do something, you almost have to prove to 50 people why you should be able to do it. And that carries both risk from a cost perspective, it carries time, And it carries an effort for a while. If you've got two people who are focused on opening, so we're looking at a few cities at the moment where we want to do both both in England and Scotland. And ideally, you want to do as much as you can. You want to do both, or you want to do three. But it's so much energy by the time you've got the right approvals from the council, and then the Privy Council sometimes, and then to the regulator. And by the time you've added all that up, you go, well, I can only do one of these. And then you might get to the end of that. It's taking so much time that you've lost the opportunity. And it's quite a frustrating thing to do. Whereas I got the impression, again, speaking to my partner right there, it was almost the opposite. It was almost like, it's going to happen. And it's going to happen anyway. And if someone comes up with a reason, you kind of just deal with it. Whereas here, I feel like we have to go in with a mentality that I don't know if it's going to be possible. Whereas theirs is, it will be possible. However, I'll deal with that. And I think that's why they can move at pace. And look, there are also issues of how they can do that and why they can do that we don't have. But I think that's why they can do things that we can't do.
And segueing into your expansion plans, either UK or internationally, what does that look like right now?
So we're very much of a view, and I'm fully committed to this, that we're going to do 25 sites in the next 5 years. And that'll be a mixture of owned and operated and franchise. So certain areas of the world where I absolutely want to own and operate, predominantly the UK, very keen on the US, parts of Western and Northern Europe. But in the Middle East, the Far East, these are areas where I'd be looking for strategic franchise partners, to which I'm very fortunate. My current existing one is very strong, and I've got a couple of heads of terms agreed for further expansion in that region. Because with a company of our size and the complexities of that part of the world, it's not something where I'd look to own and operate. But I very much believe, particularly with the arcade arena concept, where the fact that it's changeable content, not only on a day-to-day basis, but on a regional basis, that the sort of scalability and the demand is absolutely there. And we've seen that with the success in Manchester. The venue in Dubai performs even better than Manchester. And the interest we have in the products from people who get in touch with us, and we're going to be in Riyadh in May and Shanghai in June. At conferences, speaking to more potential partners, because there's no shortage of people who want content. They want venues, and we've deliberately designed this concept to be low capex, low opex, simple to operate. So you don't have to be a Disney or a Universal or a Merlin to operate. You can be a sort of more simplified operator, and it's easy to deploy. Says the person who doesn't actually have to physically build it, but in my head, it's easy to deploy.
And in the UK, would you expand the sites here, or what's the plan there, and staffing wise?
Yeah, definitely. So we go without saying that London is our priority, and we're very confident we'll have some exciting announcements on that in the next couple of months. And the only thing that stopped that is just building structure, and it comes back to the rent versus cost versus opportunity piece. But very confident. I think we've got a path forward, and then I think there's no reason. I think there's at least another 3 to 4 cities that I've got in my mind that would be perfect for the concept.
What would be your wish list of cities?
Well, there's obviously part of me that can't not do an opening in Scotland. So I don't think I'd be able to speak to my dad again if I never did. But certainly got a desire for a site in the Central Belt, and it's just between Edinburgh and Glasgow, really. Yeah. Our sites in London and Manchester kind of capture sort of the north and the south. But where it gets really exciting is, away from just the venue expansion, the game development, and where we want to be. We're very much ramping up our R&D budget this year to factor this in. Is we want to be announcing and deploying at least one game every 9 to 12 months. And what that allows is twofold. One is we could have 2 venues that if they were the same concept, would cannibalize each other because they can play different things. So, one venue could be playing Chaos Cards and the other one could be playing Pac. They're talking to the same demographic, but people will potentially do both. Whereas if they were both Chaos Cards, there's a risk, right? Why would you do both? And then the really exciting piece, and this is where we're kind of thinking with Game 3 is, and again takes the profitability piece we kind of touched on, is from a venue utilization and a demographic focus. I want to be in a place where we've got something in the morning, something in regular Monday to Friday, 9 o'clock till 2 o'clock, say the Cocomelon experience for argument's sake. Something that's targeting, ages 1 to 4, people who've not started school, people on maternity, paternity leave, the people who would go to a soft play, effectively.
Yeah.
Now, as someone who spent a lot of their life in soft play with my son, but for the record, after 2 o'clock, those places are empty. And if you go to an experience which is more tailored towards families, kids, people at work, corporate, they're not busy until 2 o'clock. And what our venue allows us to do is to play one when the demand is there and then switch the game and then play the other. So actually, you go from a world of effectively having two venues in one. Your venue is full all day with different people, and it really supports that profitability. Which I've kind of got. If you try to do both those experiences separately, there's a real risk. You're paying double the property, you're paying double the rate, you're paying double this. Whereas we've got an all-in-one type.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Yeah, interesting. So moving just to the last couple of questions, Neil. We're going to switch to sort of you more personally now. What are the key learnings? So you've been MD for 3-4 years at
yeah, I've been Little Lion for
Little
3.
Lion.
I was ops director for 2 and an MD for 1.
What would you say some of the key learnings that you've made, either you personally or with the business over the last, let's keep it to Little Lion. What are some of the key highlights or key learnings for you over the last couple of years?
Yeah, and I guess the biggest learning I've had is people would certainly would probably describe me as relatively corporate, and maybe that's because I came from a big company before, and that doesn't work in the SME world. You can't be too corporate. You have to learn to work in the grey, and that's not working in the grey legally. It's working in the grey of, something has to be done. How do we do it? Well, I'm not going to fall. It comes back to the challenge I was referencing about the bureaucracy. You're not going to do stages 1 through 7 that you might do in a corporate. You have to go from 1 to 7 because there's always a way to do it. There's always a way to do it. And it's maybe being a little bit more gritty and thinking on your feet, and that cost benefit analysis you just do on the fly sometimes. And this is where probably the chemistry degree has helped, because finally I'm getting some use of being able to do the sort of stats and the numbers. And that's probably the biggest challenge when you come from a big company to a small one, because you're used to having the protection of support functions and something's been approved by 10 people. Therefore, if you make a mistake, it's okay because they've said it's fine. Whereas you're a small company, you need to be able to, know your staff, back it up. And sometimes it won't work. And you just have to, don't make that mistake again.
Yeah, I think in smaller companies, you sort of feel the kind of market pressures a little bit more because you're sort of you're closer to the numbers, you're closer to the customers. I mean, you'd be walking around, you actually see your customers right there in front of you, right? And then the ability to make decisions quicker is great, but sometimes the need to take decisions quicker as well in a smaller business and be more
100%.
reactive. Yeah. And tell us, and we ask the same question as the last question to everybody, but tell us, Neil, about somebody in your life that's really positively affected your professional life. And that could be anybody. It could be a first leader, it could be a famous person, it could be even a member of your family. But who's a person that's really inspired you?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna cop out and say there's 2. and one is someone I've worked for, and one is just someone who's a bit of a life changing look on things. So the work one, I remember I had a previous boss, and I'd very much specialised in a single department when I was at London Eye. And again, this is where I say that I was always looked after in previous roles. And you get to that point, and I was getting a load of extra stuff given to me, and I was like, I'm not huge. I think I said to him, I'm not hugely comfortable with doing this. And I'm not usually a person to ask for help. And I just remember his response to me was, "You're not going to learn or develop anything if you swim around in your comfort zone." And that's something that stuck with me for 6 years. And it was a combination of sometimes you need a reality check of, just do it. And I sometimes worry that that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. People are maybe a little bit worried about hurting people's feelings.
Yeah.
But that's something that I will say to my team, and something that, some days you get in, you look at your inbox, you think, God, there's 5 or 6 things I don't know what I'm doing here. And that stuck with me. And again, I go back to the point, sometimes you just have to do it. And if it doesn't work, then you don't do it again. And then the second bit I would say is changed my professional perspective is ultimately when my son was born. So I used to be pretty blunt as a leader, and maybe not as understanding as I probably should have been. And we'd probably be very similar to a number of people worked 12, 14-hour days, and that was just my mentality. But what that meant was my expectations of others was unrealistic. And I think, I was thinking, well, why has this person not responded at 11 o'clock at night? And then what that's, taught me again is that I look back on how I try to interact with my team, and how I certainly feel like I want to be perceived is, everyone comes to work to have a life. My view is always with my team, I want people to be here. I want people to do the best they can. Their life needs to be their life. And the business, I will always ask the absolute most of my team, but you can't only take, you do have to give back.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have learned that in that way if I hadn't, if I didn't have a son. Because, I remember when I first moved to Little Lion, one of my team said, I need to ask if it's okay I leave on a Tuesday because I need to pick up my daughter. I was like, no, you're leaving on a Tuesday. That's fine. You're not asking my permission, because your daughter is priority number one, and then work needs to be number two. And some people may disagree with that, but I don't think you can get the best out of your team if you're not realistic about what people's priorities should be.
Great stuff. Yes, on that note, I mean, I think probably, with your own immediate family, when you have a son or a daughter, you sort of you see it firsthand, the emotional kind of reaction. You're probably more aware of your behavior, and then, oh, God, am I like that with my team?
Yeah.
It's giving you that kind of feedback and reflection. Yeah, great stuff, Neil. Thank you so much. That's a great way to end. Thank you for your time today, and good luck with the expansions. You head towards your 25 sites target.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. It's been great to speak to you. Really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.